Most people imagine mental strength as something almost emotionless. You never doubt yourself. You never feel anxious. Criticism doesn't bother you. Rejection doesn't hurt. And when life goes wrong, you somehow remain completely calm. But that's not really what mental strength looks like. Someone can criticize you and still get under your skin. A plan you spent months building can collapse and leave you disappointed. You can wake up anxious without knowing why. You can be rejected, embarrassed, or make a mistake you wish you could undo. Mental strength doesn't prevent those experiences. What changes is what happens inside you after they arrive. Two people can go through almost the same setback and come away from it in completely different psychological places. One becomes trapped in the experience. The other eventually uses it to understand something, change something, or move differently. The event may be similar. The interpretation is not. And there are 6 psychological shifts that can quietly change the way you respond to pressure, uncertainty, failure, and even your own thoughts. Once some of these shifts begin happening, it becomes surprisingly difficult to see life the old way again. If you enjoy exploring psychology, human behavior, and practical ways to understand yourself better, subscribe. That's exactly what we explore here. The first shift begins when something doesn't go according to plan. Maybe you didn't get the opportunity you expected. Someone disappointed you. A relationship ended. You worked hard for something and still failed. The mind naturally wants an explanation. Why me? Why does this always happen? Why can't things just work for once? Those questions are understandable. But notice what they have in common. They keep your attention attached to something that has already happened. A psychologically stronger question sounds different. Given that this happened, what is still under my control? That question doesn't magically make the situation fair. And it doesn't mean blaming yourself for everything that happens to you. Some experiences really are unfair. Some losses cannot be reversed. Some people's behavior has nothing to do with you. But there's a difference between acknowledging that you didn't control what happened and surrendering control over what happens next. Maybe you can't change the rejection, but you can decide what you learn from it. You can't control another person's behavior, but you can decide what access they continue to have to you. You can't undo a mistake, but you can decide whether it becomes a lesson or a permanent identity. That's the shift, from searching only for reasons to searching for agency. You may not control what entered your life, but you can still influence what happens next. The second shift appears in a place most people instinctively try to escape: discomfort. Think about something you've been avoiding. Maybe it's a difficult conversation. Sending an application when rejection is possible. Setting a boundary that could disappoint someone. Starting something you're not yet good at. Avoidance often brings immediate relief. You don't send the message and the anxiety drops. You postpone the conversation and for a moment, everything feels easier. And that's exactly why avoidance can become so convincing. Your brain begins learning a simple equation. Discomfort means stop. But discomfort and danger are not the same thing. Sometimes discomfort is not telling you to escape. Sometimes it's showing you the exact place where growth requires something from you. The shift happens when you stop asking only, "How can I make this feeling disappear?" and begin asking, "What is this discomfort asking me to face?" This doesn't mean suffering is automatically valuable. Pain for the sake of pain isn't growth. But honesty can be uncomfortable. Boundaries can be uncomfortable. Learning can be uncomfortable. Change can be uncomfortable. Sometimes the feeling you're trying hardest to avoid is simply the emotional price of doing something important. So think about the thing you've been postponing. Is it actually dangerous? Or is it simply uncomfortable? The third shift is more subtle because the thing you're learning to step back from is your own mind. A thought appears. You're going to fail. They probably don't respect you. Everyone else is moving forward faster than you. You should have figured this out by now. And when a thought appears strongly enough, it doesn't feel like a thought. It feels like a fact. That's one of the mind's most convincing tricks. We often assume that because something appeared in our consciousness, it deserves our trust. But imagine changing one sentence. Instead of saying, "I'm going to fail," you say, "I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail." Almost nothing changed linguistically. Psychologically, something important did. You created distance between yourself and the prediction. The thought can still be there. The anxiety can still be there. But now you can examine it rather than automatically living inside it. Is this prediction based on evidence? Is my mind trying to protect me from uncertainty? Have I had this thought before and been wrong? Mentally stronger people don't necessarily have quieter minds. They can overthink, worry, imagine worst-case scenarios, and doubt themselves like anyone else. The difference is that every thought doesn't automatically get promoted to truth. And you don't have to fight every negative thought either. Trying desperately not to think something can sometimes give it even more attention. You can simply notice it. There goes my mind predicting rejection again. There goes the comparison. There goes the worst-case scenario. A thought can be present without becoming the person in charge. You don't have to defeat every thought. Sometimes you only need to stop treating it like an instruction. And this leads to the fourth shift, realizing that effort and outcome are two different things. You can prepare extremely well for an interview and still not get the job. You can communicate honestly and still be misunderstood. You can care deeply about someone and still not control how they feel about you. You can work hard and still have no guarantee that success will arrive when you expect it. A surprising amount of mental exhaustion comes from trying to control both sides of that equation, your effort and the outcome. But only one of them truly belongs to you. Mental strength grows when you begin separating situations into two questions. What requires my effort? And what requires my acceptance? If something belongs to your effort, act on it. Prepare. Practice. Communicate. Make the decision. Have the conversation. Change the behavior. But when something belongs to uncertainty, trying to mentally control it doesn't give you more control. It often just gives you more anxiety. Acceptance doesn't mean you like what happened. It doesn't mean giving up or becoming passive. It means seeing reality clearly enough to stop arguing with the fact that it is already real. And strangely, that can free up enormous amounts of energy for the things you can actually influence. If one of these shifts is describing something you're working on right now, tell me which one in the comments. And if you're finding this useful, leave a like. It helps more people discover these conversations. Because the final two shifts go even deeper. They're not just about how you handle difficult situations. They're about how securely you can look at yourself. The fifth shift often appears during a moment most of us dislike. Being told we might be wrong. Someone criticizes something you did. And before you've even fully considered what they said, your mind starts building a defense. They don't understand. They would have done the same thing. They're exaggerating. They're not exactly perfect either. Sometimes those responses may even be true. But notice how quickly the mind can move from receiving information to protecting identity. Because being wrong about something can quietly begin to feel like something much bigger. If I was wrong, maybe I'm incompetent. If I handled that badly, maybe I'm a bad person. If they know something I don't, maybe I'm not as capable as I thought. So the ego tries to protect you. But sometimes that protection also prevents you from learning. The shift happens when the question changes from, how do I prove that I'm right, to something more uncomfortable. What if there's something here I need to see? That doesn't mean accepting every criticism. Some criticism is unfair. Some is manipulative. Some comes from people who don't understand the situation at all. Mental strength isn't believing everyone else. It's being secure enough to examine what they say without feeling that your entire identity is on trial. You can discover that you were wrong without concluding that you're worthless. You can recognize a weakness without turning it into a definition of yourself. A fragile ego needs every mistake explained away. A stable identity can afford to learn. And sometimes one of the strongest things you can say isn't, I knew that. It's, I didn't see that before. And the sixth shift may be the deepest one because it changes the story you tell yourself about who you are. People carry identity statements around without realizing how powerful they become. I'm just an anxious person. I'm terrible with people. I've never been disciplined. I'm not confident. I always quit. That's just who I am. At first, these may sound like simple descriptions. But repeat them long enough, and a pattern can begin to feel like a personality. Then something strange happens. Changing the behavior starts to feel like contradicting who you are. You avoid speaking because you're not confident. You stop trying because you're someone who always quits. You assume you'll procrastinate because you've never been disciplined. The past becomes evidence for the future, and the future keeps recreating the past. Mental strength begins to change this relationship with identity. Instead of saying, this is who I am, you begin to recognize, this is a pattern I've practiced. And patterns are not permanent verdicts. They can be interrupted. They can be replaced. They can be practiced differently. You don't need to wake up tomorrow as a completely different person. Confidence might begin with one conversation you normally would have avoided. Discipline might begin with keeping one small promise to yourself when nobody is watching. Resilience might begin with having a terrible day without turning it into a terrible week. Mental strength is often built through evidence. Every time you respond differently, even in a small way, you give your mind new evidence about what you're capable of. And eventually, the question stops being, how do I prove who I am? It becomes, who am I becoming through what I repeatedly choose? When you put all 6 shifts together, something interesting appears. You stop spending all your energy asking why life happened to you and begin looking for what remains within your control. You stop treating every uncomfortable feeling as a signal to retreat. You stop assuming every thought deserves to be believed. You stop demanding certainty from outcomes you cannot control. You become secure enough to discover that you were wrong without needing to defend your entire identity. And finally, you stop treating the person you've been as a permanent definition of the person you can become. None of this makes you emotionless. You will still feel afraid. You will still overthink sometimes. You will still become disappointed, defensive, uncertain, frustrated, or overwhelmed. Mental strength isn't the absence of those experiences. It's psychological flexibility. It's being able to experience something difficult without automatically allowing that experience to decide what happens next. Maybe that's why genuine mental strength often looks much quieter than people expect. Sometimes it looks like continuing while you're uncertain. Sometimes it's admitting you were wrong. Sometimes it's sitting with an uncomfortable feeling instead of immediately escaping it. Sometimes it's noticing a frightening thought and deciding not to organize your life around it. And sometimes it's simply refusing to let an old version of yourself make every new decision. So think about these 6 shifts for a moment. Which one are you already developing? And which one would change your life the most if you practiced it more consistently? Tell me in the comments. And if this video gave you something useful to think about, leave a like. You don't become mentally strong the moment life becomes easier. You become mentally stronger when difficult moments stop having the final say over who you become. And if you want to keep exploring the psychology behind the way you think, feel, and behave, click the video appearing on your screen right now. I'll see you there.